would you risk your career just to honor a personal promise? This is the story of a royal guard who defied 500 years of tradition because one woman once reminded him that being human is more important than being perfect. What he did during the funeral of Princess Helena left an entire nation speechless and left his commanders unsure how to respond. If you believe dignity is earned, not commanded, then hit like, drop a comment below, and subscribe for stories that honor what matters most. Stick around. What happens at the end is unforgettable. Skies above Buckingham Palace were slate gray that morning, draped in silence. Inside the gates, thousands gathered, not just for royalty, but for Princess Helena, the most beloved member of the royal family. Known for visiting children's hospitals without press and sneaking out to deliver food to the homeless at night, she had touched hearts far beyond the crown. Among the silent guards flanking the palace steps was Sergeant Lucas Bennett, a royal guard with 15 years of perfect service, a man of order, routine, and secrets. But this wasn't just another ceremonial assignment for him. Beneath his crimson tunic and silver beveled chest, hidden in the inside pocket, was a folded letter. A letter written by Helena herself, years ago, after an encounter that neither of them ever forgot. And as her casket emerged into the courtyard, Lucas felt the weight of that moment pressing against his heart. What he did next would last 28 seconds, but would echo across history. Because sometimes the greatest loyalty is not to silence, but to remembrance. 2 years before Princess Helena's funeral, in a quiet courtyard of Windsor Castle, it happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Sergeant Lucas Bennett had just ended his midday shift when he noticed something out of place in the Queen's rose garden. A faint, sobbing sound, soft, rhythmic, not the kind one expects in a royal estate. Guards were trained to ignore emotion, but something about this was different. He followed the sound quietly, finding Princess Helena sitting alone on a marble bench, her face hidden behind dark sunglasses. It was rare to see her unguarded. Known for her poise and public charm, Helena had always projected calm under pressure, but this time she looked broken. Without thinking, Lucas spoke. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She looked up, startled, not by his words, but by the tone. It wasn't official. It wasn't rehearsed. It was human. Helena didn't scold him. Instead, she motioned for him to sit, an unthinkable act between a royal and a guard. And for 20 minutes she talked, not as a princess, but as a woman grieving her recently lost sister, feeling alone in a palace full of people trained to pretend everything was fine. Lucas didn't offer solutions. He simply listened. That day, something passed between them. Not romance, not familiarity, but respect. A silent understanding that even in a world of ceremony, real connection could still exist. Before leaving, Helena handed him a small folded envelope. "If the day ever comes when I can't speak for myself," she whispered, "I'd like you to say something for me, but not in words. You'll know what to do." Lucas never opened the letter. He tucked it inside his uniform, transferred it to every new coat issued, never speaking of it, not even to his closest mates in the barracks. Most assumed he was simply meticulous. Only he knew that he was carrying something sacred. And then, 2 years later, the news came. Princess Helena had died suddenly in a helicopter accident while returning from a charity visit in northern Scotland. The nation mourned. Flags flew at half-staff. And Lucas stood once again in full dress uniform, this time not for pageantry, but for the woman who once reminded him that being human wasn't weakness, it was strength. The funeral procession was scheduled down to the second, precision rehearsed to the inch. The royal guards were under strict order, no deviation. Cameras from every continent were rolling. The world was watching. But as Helena's casket was carried into the courtyard, something shifted in Lucas. That envelope, still unbroken, pressed against his chest like a heartbeat. He had made a promise. And now, in front of the entire world, he had a choice. Stay silent and follow the rules, or break formation and honor the woman who taught him that some traditions are meant to be transformed. The courtyard at Buckingham Palace had never been so quiet. Rows of dignitaries, foreign royals, and members of the public stood beneath overcast skies as the Queen's Guard assembled in flawless symmetry. Television drones hovered silently overhead. Live feeds ticked across global news channels. Princess Helena's state funeral. A nation mourns. Sergeant Lucas Bennet stood third from the palace steps, halberd in hand, boots polished to a mirror finish. He had trained 15 years for moments like this, where poise, not personality, defined a man. But today the world would see something different. The casket, draped in the royal standard and adorned with white gardenias, Helena's favorite, moved slowly toward its final resting place. Lucas's eyes remained forward, but inside his heart pounded against the folded envelope in his chest pocket. Captain Gray's voice echoed in his memory. You break formation, and it's not just your job you lose, it's your name, your legacy. But Helena's voice whispered louder, you'll know what to do. As the pallbearers paused at the foot of the palace steps, a moment of silence was called. It was supposed to be symbolic, a brief stillness to mark the end of a life. But to Lucas, it was permission. He moved one step, two. The tap of his heel against the ancient stones cut through the silence like a drumbeat. Gasps fluttered through the crowd. A royal guard had just broken formation on live television. The younger guard flinched. A camera zoomed in. Reporters muttered urgently in their headsets. Lucas approached the casket with steady, reverent movements. No panic, no rebellion, just a man keeping a promise. He drew the envelope from his breast pocket with gloved hands, knelt slowly before the casket, and placed the letter beneath the edge of the gardenia arrangement. He bowed his head, not as a soldier, but as a friend, then rose and stepped back, resuming his position as if nothing had happened. The entire breach lasted less than 30 seconds, but nothing would be the same. From the press gallery, silence. From the guests, stunned stillness. Even Captain Graves, who had begun to step forward, stopped mid-stride as he saw the envelope. Those close enough to glimpse the letter saw the royal crest pressed in gold wax. No signature, no instruction. Just a presence, a final word unspoken, shared only between two souls, one living, one gone. Lucas returned to his mark and stood like a statue once more. But this time, his stillness didn't feel like obedience. It felt like closure. What he had done would ripple through headlines and halls of command for days. But in that moment, beneath the watchful eyes of millions, one man had reminded the world. There are promises stronger than protocol, and grief more sacred than silence. Buckingham Palace had endured centuries of pageantry, weddings, coronations, jubilees. But nothing prepared it for what just happened. One royal guard had broken formation during a state funeral, not in protest, not in error, but in tribute. And while the crowd remained respectfully silent, the machine of tradition began grinding behind closed doors. Inside the guard's chamber later that evening, Lucas Bennet stood at attention, not on the palace steps, but in front of his superior officers. Captain Graves paced slowly behind a long oak table, where 3 high-ranking officials from the royal household sat. "We're not here to question your loyalty," one said calmly. "We're here to understand your decision." Lucas remained silent for a moment before replying, "I kept a promise, sir." The room stilled. "To whom?" asked another. "To the princess," he said softly. "She entrusted me with a letter years ago. She asked that when the time came, I'd know when to deliver it. Today was that moment." There was no outrage in their eyes, only uncertainty. Lucas had not embarrassed the institution. He had challenged it. Quietly, reverently, but undeniably. Inside the palace walls, public opinion split down the middle. Traditionalists called it a disgrace. No guard should ever break protocol, no matter the reason. But others, especially older citizens and veterans, called it something else entirely. That was the most human thing I've ever seen in a royal ceremony. News anchors debated. A journalist from the BBC called it a reminder that loyalty is not silence, it's presence, even in grief. Another report revealed that Buckingham Palace had received over 20,000 letters of support for Lucas in the first 48 hours. Even the palace chaplain, Father Jonathan Hale, requested a private word with Lucas 2 days later. "I saw what you did," he said gently. "It wasn't about show, it was about soul." Lucas said nothing, but his silence spoke volumes. He had served 15 years with unwavering discipline. But it was this single act of defiance, measured, heartfelt, and silent, that would come to define his legacy. Back in his small quarters that evening, Lucas removed the crimson tunic from its hanger. He folded it with care, laying it flat on the edge of his bed. The metal stitched to his left shoulder glinted under the low light. He didn't know if he'd be reassigned, demoted, or quietly retired. But he knew one thing for certain: he had not failed her. And in a palace where most loyalty was measured in silence and stillness, he had spoken through motion. Because there are moments when the deepest respect isn't about standing still, it's about stepping forward. 3 days passed with no formal reprimand, no applause, no ceremony, just silence. Then, before dawn on the 4th day, an envelope was slipped beneath Sergeant Lucas Bennett's door. No wax seal, no insignia, just his name written in plain black ink. Inside, a brief letter. "Effective immediately, you are reassigned to the Royal Archives Division. Further instructions enclosed. Report at 900. Captain Graves." Lucas didn't blink. He had expected this. A quiet exile, the kind the palace preferred when it didn't want scandal or acknowledgement. He would not be dismissed, but he would no longer appear in ceremonies, parades, or royal funerals. The Royal Archives sat beneath St. James's Palace, far from the cameras, tourists, and grand balconies. Few ever visited, most forgot it existed. But it housed over 800 years of royal correspondence, handwritten orders, and state records. Sealed in temperature-controlled vaults. At precisely 9 o'clock AIEM, Lucas arrived in plain black uniform. No tunic, no halberd, just a small silver pin on his collar, guard security. There he was greeted by Lady Evelyn Whitmore, a stooped historian in her 70s, with sharp eyes and a voice like parchment. "You're the one from the funeral," she said without raising her head from a leather-bound folio. "I expected someone taller." Lucas cracked a faint smile. "I've spent most of my life trying not to be noticed, ma'am." "Then you failed beautifully," she replied, before handing him a stack of ancient letters. "Welcome to the vault." Weeks passed. Lucas settled into a new rhythm. Quiet corridors, soft glows of reading lamps, the scent of aged paper. Here, there were no salutes, no parades, just history, silence, and meaning. At first, he missed the crisp click of boots on stone and the symmetry of formation, but over time, he began to see his new post not as a punishment, but as a new kind of duty. Here he wasn't guarding people, he was guarding stories. And then one afternoon, deep within the archive's restricted wing, he stumbled across a familiar envelope. Sealed with the crest of Princess Helena was a copy of the same letter he had carried to her coffin. On the back, a handwritten note, presumably penned by Helena herself years ago, read, "If he delivers this, let him stay close to the truth, not tradition, truth." He sat back in the dim light, heart pounding. Her words had traveled farther than he knew. She had prepared for this moment. She had known. That evening, as he closed the vault and turned out the lights, Lucas realized something quietly profound. He had been reassigned, yes, but not buried. Helena had given him not just a letter, but a calling to remember what others forget, to protect not just people, but the principles they stood for. And in this archive of faded ink and fragile parchment, Lucas found something he hadn't felt in weeks. At first glance, nothing about Sergeant Lucas Bennett had changed. He still rose before dawn, still polished his boots with care, still walked with military posture through the stone corridors of St. James's Palace. But something inside him, something subtle, had shifted. He no longer measured his worth by ceremony. He no longer craved the approving nod of commanders or the rhythm of parade drums. His definition of duty had deepened, from obedience to understanding. In the Royal Archives, Lucas began spending long hours reading the personal letters of monarchs, guards, and citizens, some handwritten in sorrow, others in rage, many in love, but all of them real. He found comfort in them, because for the first time in years he was allowed to feel. One afternoon, while reviewing war correspondence from World War II, Lucas read a letter from a former palace guard to his wife. "I was taught to never blink, never flinch, never speak, but today as the bombs fell, I held a child's hand and whispered that it would be all right. I broke every rule, and I've never felt more loyal to the crown." Lucas read that line over and over, and for the first time since the funeral he cried, not because he regretted anything, but because he finally understood the weight of it all, not just the act of standing still, but the courage it took to move when it mattered most. Weeks later, during a rare visit from Captain Graves, the officer paused at Lucas's desk. "I've read the letters, you know," Graves said, referring to the thousands the palace had received, "about what you did." Lucas stood still, unsure of what to say. Graves continued, "The press called it a breach. I called it a lesson." Lucas met his eyes. Graves nodded toward the shelves. "And you're learning more down here than any of us did up there." Then, after a long pause, Graves added, "I've submitted a request, not for reinstatement, but for something new, a special division, one focused not on protection of ceremony, but protection of memory. I want you to lead it." Lucas was stunned. "Why me?" Graves smiled faintly. "Because tradition is easy to maintain, but truth? That needs guardians." That night, Lucas walked alone through the palace gardens, the autumn leaves crunching beneath his boots. For the first time in 15 years, he allowed himself to walk without purpose, just to walk. He thought of Helena, of her whisper, "You'll know what to do." And now he understood. She hadn't asked him to challenge the system. She asked him to remind it why it existed in the first place. That's what his growth looked like. Not rebellion, not ambition, but quiet alignment between his heart and his oath. Because being a royal guard wasn't about standing still. It was about standing for something. The leaves had begun to fall in St. James's Park as London drifted into winter. Tourists now passed Sergeant Lucas Bennett without a second glance. Gone were the bright crimson tunics, the towering bearskin hat, and the halberd he once held like a symbol of silence. In their place, a modest black uniform, and a man changed not by scandal, but by clarity. Yet among those who worked within the palace grounds, he was still spoken of quietly, respected. Some whispered, "He's the one who stepped forward." Others said, "He placed something on the princess's casket, no one knows what." But those who truly understood didn't need details. They understood what it meant for a man of steel posture to allow himself grace, and how sometimes the smallest movement can make the loudest impact. In the months that followed, Lucas quietly helped shape what would become known within palace walls as the Memory Division, a new unit, small, almost invisible, tasked with preserving not only royal documents, but the stories behind them, personal truths, unofficial moments, acts of compassion never recorded in the official books. And though the division had no parades, no public honors, those who worked there knew its value. One morning, a young recruit from the household cavalry stopped Lucas in the corridor. "Sir," he said nervously, "I was there, the day of the funeral. I saw what you did." Lucas turned, gently. "I didn't do much." The young man smiled, eyes full of reverence. "You did enough. I joined because of that day." Lucas nodded, heart swelling, not with pride, but with quiet fulfillment. His moment of vulnerability hadn't just preserved Helena's final request. It had sparked something in others. Later that evening, Lucas returned to the vaults alone. He opened the glass case that held Helena's original letter, now framed with her wax seal still intact. Above it, a brass plaque read, "For the man who remembered not just where to stand, but why it matters." He stood silently before it, hands folded behind his back, eyes soft with memory. The royal guard had trained him to be a fortress, but Helena reminded him to be a bridge between protocol and compassion, between rules and meaning, between duty and heart. And that was the legacy he would carry forward. Not the medals, not the posture, not even the letter, but the understanding that honor isn't measured in silence. It's measured in the moments when you dare to break it for the right reasons. What if it were you? Imagine standing in full uniform at the gates of history. Before you, a nation grieves, cameras click, eyes watch, protocol is ironclad. You are not to move, not to speak, not to feel. But beneath your uniform is a letter. Not just any letter, but a personal, handwritten note from the woman whose funeral you are guarding. She had trusted you, and she had asked you, without ever commanding you, to do something when the time came. Now the casket is 20 feet away. Your hand trembles slightly. You've rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, but not this version of it. What would you do? Would you follow the rules like you always have, and let that letter remain unread, unopened, unshared? Would you take the step forward that might cost you your role, your reputation, your entire career, just to keep your word? That's the choice Sergeant Lucas Bennett faced. And in those silent seconds, he chose something few have the courage to do. He honored not just tradition, but truth. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a speech. He simply stepped forward, delivered a promise, and returned to his place, as if to say, "This uniform doesn't own my soul, it reflects it." For those of us watching, especially those of us in our later years, it's a reminder that the greatest test of loyalty isn't about following rules. It's knowing when they must bend for something greater, because life teaches us this. There will be moments when no one's watching, and you must still choose integrity. There will be times when everyone's watching, and you must still choose conscience. And there will be times when silence is expected, but action is what matters most. Lucas didn't break protocol because he lacked discipline. He broke it because discipline alone is not virtue. Discernment is, that's something only life can teach you. Something age helps us recognize faster than youth ever can. If you were in Lucas' shoes, what would you have done? Would you have stepped forward, or would you have stood still? There's no right answer that fits every life, but maybe the right answer is the one that lets you sleep peacefully at night. The one that says, I did not betray what mattered. So here's the lesson. In the end, no one remembers how many steps you marched or how straight your posture stood. They remember who you were when it counted. And when the uniform is folded, and when the medals are boxed away, when the audience fades, what's left is the legacy you lived through action, not just what you protected, but why you protected it. Your turn. If this story moved you, even just a little, let us know in the comments. From 1 to 10, how deeply did this story touch you? What would you have done in Lucas's place? Would you have stepped forward or stayed in formation? Let's see your voice, because stories like this are not just meant to be watched. They're meant to be remembered. Don't forget, hit subscribe so you never miss a story that moves your heart. Tap like if you believe honor still matters. Share this with someone who knows the weight of promises. And if you're new here, check out our video on the billionaire who couldn't buy dignity. It's another story of how courage often wears a silent face. We'll see you tomorrow, same time, same channel. Until then, keep standing for something that matters, even if you're the only one who does.